J Dilla's Moog synthesizer and MPC 3000 sampler are featured in the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. That alone should help you realize the impact this man had on music as a whole. He's worked with some of hip-hop's greatest ever artists and has been revered by critics and fans alike. Pharell named him his favorite producer of all time. Kanye said, "One of the best days of my life was when he handed me a record with drums on it." Madlib once told Radio France that J Dilla was the Johnny Coltrane of hip-hop. This video is firstly an introduction to J Dilla if you don't already know about him, and secondly will be a detailed analysis of some of his tracks from a hip-hop classic, Donuts. As a quick note, this video references an academic paper made by Zachary Diaz. If you really like the content of this video, make sure to check that paper out. J Dilla, born James Yancey, was a product of Motown, a style of music that fused soul and pop elements in the 1960s that became immensely popular. His dad, Beverly Yancey, worked for the Ford Motor Company for 40 years and was a friend of Motown Records founder Berry Gordy. His dad was a vocal coach who played upright bass, and his mother Maureen sang in various styles including jazz, opera and gospel. His parents were strict and pushed him into any musical endeavour they could from a young age to keep him out of trouble. J Dilla then had an immensely musical and creative background, and his environment definitely shaped the direction he headed in growing up. J Dilla sadly passed away at 32 of lupus, an autoimmune disease that can damage any part of the body and has no known cure. He released Donuts 3 days before he passed on the 10th of February 2006. He spent his last 9 months in hospital. Despite this, he is said to have produced 29 of the 31 tracks on Donuts and other unreleased volumes using simple portable equipment while bedridden. Now, if that's not the benchmark for passion, I honestly don't know what is. He's often been compared to Mozart, who himself wrote part of Requiem while on his own deathbed. Two musicians separated by generations, but linked by devotion to sound and music. So before we get into Donuts, what actually was J Dilla's specialty? What made him stand out? They were his bass lines, his non-quantized drum beats, his sampling style, and his chopping abilities. So let's start with bass lines. He often made them contrast to the melody of the sample that he used. For example, when he was part of the group Slum Village, his track Get This Money off Fantastic Volume 2 uses a Herbie Hancock sample as the main melody. The bass line here uses an Aeolian scale. Meanwhile, the main vocal melody descends chromatically as opposed to using pedal bass notes. Chromaticism generally refers to contrast or addition to tonality. Dilla here uses it to add depth to an already complex track. He used to also lack quantization in his beats. For example, on Untitled Fantastic by Slum Village, look at how the upbeats of the hi-hat and kick drum occur slightly after the 8th note divisions, and the snare pattern occurs slightly before beats 2 and 4. Knowing this, let's jump into Donuts and certain tracks on it to study his intricate skills. Donuts was named after the 45 RPM vinyl and one of his favourite snacks. Donuts, like the food, is circular. In the musical case, it can be played on loop seamlessly. In fact, the first track, Donuts Outro, and last track, Welcome to the Show, even use the same sample. The album appropriately features key themes on death, love and self-reflection. J Dilla of course knew his fate for some time. Just read the track list and see songs such as Don't Cry and Last Donut of the Night. You quickly realize his self-awareness even in his own music. J Dilla often uses a horn sample of the rap group Mantronix's 1985 single King of the Beats, which appears numerous times on the album. It's his own subtle proclamation as the king of beats. Jordan Ferguson, the author of the 33 and a half Donuts book series, notes that a lot of the tracks have less in common with hip-hop and more in common to Pierre Schaeffer. Pierre Schaeffer was an electroacoustic French composer who is widely recognized as the first musician to utilize recording and sampling techniques. So you might say, okay, what was the link between them then? Well, if you listen to both of their works, you can hear similar textures and an almost experimental approach to mixing different samples together. J Dilla was not a vocalist or rapper himself, but as you probably know, he popularized beat tapes, instrumental collections of his work. On the track Don't Cry, he lets the sample from The Temptations speak for him. Alright, you sing it, and I'll show you how my voice would have made it unbelievable. J Dilla recontextualizes the meaning of this statement to refer to his talents as a producer. He also often presents unaltered samples. In this video, we'll call this the expectation. He then presents his own chopped version of the same sample within the same track many times. I'll call this part the fulfillment. Notice how the sample used in the intro is then reused at 40 seconds in and chopped into individual sections at an approximate length of an eighth note each, with a BPM increase from 70 to 88. Listen to some of the tracks yourself. You'll feel the effortless changes in BPM. This in practice is not an easy thing to do and certainly came from years of practice, no doubt. J Dilla's sampling here also emphasizes certain vocal segments, and he continually repeats them in his tracks, often cutting out more minor samples. This was his version of lyrics. On the track Don't Cry, the sample style, for example, emphasizes the line, "I can't stand to see you cry." On the track Waves, he chops the British rock band 10cc's song, "Johnny Don't Do It," so that the vocals actually emphasize, "Johnny, do it." This is a potential reference to tell his brother, John Yancey, to go into hip-hop and continue carrying the torch for his family. He does this on other tracks such as Bye, where despite the original sample being in a 6/8 or another compound time signature, their placement feels regular and separate to the beat. His sampling also introduces complex composite melodies that build upon the basics of the original samples that he uses. Looking back at Don't Cry, the original sample uses a 1-4-5 chord progression in the key of D flat major. The harmonic qualities, however, are much more tonally ambiguous, using mainly a harmonic ostinato that alternates between E flat and F minor triads. The melodic components are also more simplistic, with E flat being featured prominently. This is just one example of how he loved pushing boundaries within his own tracks. For Donuts and while in hospital, Dilla utilized the extensive effects present on the Boss SP303 sampler. These range from more commonly used effects like compression and delay to more unorthodox effects like ring modulation. As briefly touched on already, he utilized time stretching in tracks such as Time, the Donut of the Heart, where he samples the Jackson 5's All I Do Is Think of You. He modifies the sample's BPM from 60 to 93, while the guitar melody resolves in stepwise descending motion in each reiteration of the 2-measure loop. The last notes of the melody, featuring the 3rd and 2nd scale degrees, then descend to the tonic of A flat major once the melody is looped and repeated. So what does that mean? It creates a sense of forward motion and keeps the track flowing. Have a listen. It's difficult to press the stop button once you actually play that track. While the increase in tempo would customarily be coupled with raising of pitch, the pitch is actually in fact lowered by a minor third from its original key of B major to A flat major. The decrease in pitch in conjunction with the increase in tempo gives the manipulated sample a unique timbre, giving an impression of a distorted and somewhat unnatural sounding texture. This is most apparent when snippets of vocal samples from the Jackson 5 song are played on top of the guitar melody and produce a manipulated vocal range that sounds similar to a male baritone range. This contrasts greatly with Michael Jackson's much more vibrant high tenor vocal range. J Dilla on Time also slowed down a sample significantly from its original tempo of 93 beats per minute to 46.5 beats per minute. This can often create harsh distortions, and a lot of producers would avoid this, but Dilla embraced it numerous times. On MASH, he speaks to the audience through the sample vocal phrase "It's Strange," taken from the 1969 Lou Rawls song Season of the Witch. Here he refers to the haunting and distorted timbre due to his application of ring modulation on the sample, something that wasn't conventionally done in hip-hop, let alone musical sampling. Timbre means the distinctive qualities of a sound. It's the term used to describe how two instruments can play the same frequency but still sound different. Dr. Amanda Sewell's PhD dissertation, A Typology of Sampling in Hip-Hop, states that samples can be structural, surface, and/or lyrical in nature, with structural being the main sample, surface acting as additional textures, and lyrical referring to vocal segments. Working on It, for example, features all three types, and also some samples fall into more than one category. Dr. Sewell labelled these as aggregate samples. For example, J Dilla here uses a lyrical sample as turntable record scratchings, which interrupts the drum groove continuously. His intricate use of melodies was also a key skill and a feature of his tracks. Working on Its main sample uses the 6-7-1 chord progression and is in Aeolian mode. However, towards the end of the track, the guitar sample plays a scale degree that is of a lowered 7th and raised 6th. This causes the pitch center to then change to Dorian mode and adds a brighter feel to the overall track. Later on in the track, he adds a synthesizer melody which acts as a counter melody to the lead guitar sample. These techniques demonstrate how Dilla was able to intricately change the mood of a song without a disruptive effect. So, in conclusion, looking at even a few tracks off Donuts, you gain an appreciation for his attention to detail. He was able to combine sampling, effects, and chopping all into one cohesive project from some 40 RPM records and a sampler. Questlove, the drummer from the legendary Roots group, stated Dilla's sampling ability was the equivalent of solving a 10,000 piece puzzle in record time. Just imagine trying to solve that. Questlove also stated, "If you hear any song with a glitch now in the drum pattern, that was Dilla. If you hear bouncy, filtered bass patterns, Dilla. Offbeat snaps, offbeat claps, Dilla was also a pioneer." J Dilla then certainly laid new foundations for modern hip-hop producers, and in doing so left a legacy that will forever be a part of the genre itself.